You're declining our offer? Good luck finding something better, the hiring manager said, throwing his head back with a laugh that echoed against the glass walls of the conference room. His colleagues exchanged amused glances as if I'd told the funniest joke they'd heard all week. I gripped my portfolio tighter, heat rising up my neck. My expertise in rare earth material recycling commands a higher market value. 8 years of specialized experience isn't reflected in this offer. We have 20 eager candidates who'd accept this salary without question, he replied, tapping my resume dismissively. Perhaps you've overestimated your importance. Something snapped inside me. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and looked him directly in the eyes. No, I haven't, but you certainly have underestimated it. Walking out, I heard them chuckling behind me. 3 weeks of interviews, ending like this. I had 2 weeks until rent was due, and dwindling savings. I never imagined that within 72 hours, everything would change. Before I tell you how I turned that humiliation into the greatest career triumph of my life, I want you to think about a time when someone undervalued your worth. Remember how it felt? That burning in your chest? That voice inside saying, I deserve better. Hold on to that feeling, because what happens next might just give you the courage to stand your ground the next time someone tries to diminish your value. My name is Belinda Arvelo, and until 6 months ago, I was the unsung genius behind one of the biggest breakthroughs in rare earth material recycling technology. The kind of innovation that environmental scientists and manufacturing executives dream about. A method that reduced extraction costs by 42% while increasing yield purity. The kind of innovation that made the cover of industry magazines, with my boss's name featured prominently while mine was nowhere to be found. I'd always been the quiet one, the meticulous researcher who stayed late analyzing test results while others networked at industry events. My parents, both high school teachers from Puerto Rico who'd settled in Michigan, had instilled in me a belief that excellence speaks for itself. Let your work be your voice, my father always said. For years I believed that. Until the day I watched my discovery, the culmination of 3 years of tireless research, being presented at the annual Earth Resources Conference by my supervisor Meredith. She stood there in the spotlight, fielding questions about my process, accepting accolades for my discovery, while I sat in the audience, invisible. I'd developed the chemical bonding theory that made the extraction possible. I'd run thousands of tests in that basement lab with outdated equipment. I'd sacrificed weekends and holidays. And yet there I was, reduced to a mere footnote in her presentation, with assistance from the research team. That night in my hotel room, I made myself a promise. Never again would I allow my contributions to be diminished. Never again would I let someone else take credit for my brilliance. Never again would I stay silent about my value. So when the job offer came from Greenward Technologies, a rising company in sustainable manufacturing with all their environmentally friendly buzzwords and promises of innovation, I was cautiously optimistic. Their recruitment process had been intense. 3 technical interviews, a presentation of my research methodology, meetings with 5 different department heads. They seemed genuinely impressed by my portfolio. The hiring manager, Nolan, had nodded appreciatively during my presentation on molecular separation techniques. Yet when the offer finally arrived, the salary was barely above what I'd made as a mid-level researcher at my previous company. For a senior position requiring specialized expertise that fewer than 50 people in the country possessed, it was insultingly low. I prepared meticulously for the negotiation meeting. I researched market rates, compiled data on comparable positions, practiced my talking points. I walked into that conference room ready to advocate for myself professionally. What I wasn't prepared for was ridicule. After the humiliating meeting, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. Had I just made a catastrophic mistake? In this economy, with sustainability initiatives facing budget cuts across the industry, had I just walked away from what might be my only opportunity? My phone buzzed, a text from my sister, Lucia. How did it go? I couldn't bring myself to respond immediately. Instead, I drove home to my apartment, a modest 1-bedroom with rent that suddenly seemed dauntingly expensive. As I heated leftover rice and beans for dinner, I finally called Lucia. You did what? She exclaimed after I explained what happened. In this economy? Belinda, are you crazy? They offered junior-level pay for senior-level work, I explained, pacing my small kitchen. The hiring manager actually laughed when I countered. But your apartment, your bills, I'll figure it out. Lucia sighed through the phone. Look, I support you standing up for yourself, but be realistic. Maybe call them back tomorrow? Say you reconsidered? And start a job knowing I'm undervalued from day one? No thanks. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and applied to 14 positions. I scheduled 2 interviews for the following week. I updated my professional networking profiles. I calculated exactly how long my savings would last if I cut back on everything but essentials. 53 days. Not great, but not impossible. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run, pushing myself harder than usual, trying to outpace the doubt chasing me. Had I been arrogant? Was my work really as valuable as I believed? Maybe Meredith had been right to take the credit. Maybe my contribution wasn't as significant as I thought. No, I refused to let those thoughts take root. I knew my worth. I knew what I had accomplished. I knew what I could bring to any company smart enough to recognize it. 3 days passed. I prepared for my upcoming interviews, researching the companies thoroughly. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. This time, I'd discuss compensation expectations early in the process. Then, at 2:17 p.m., my personal cell phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, this is Belinda. Ms. Arvelo? This is Darren Winslow, CEO of Greenward Technologies. My breath caught. I'd never spoken with the CEO during the interview process, had never even seen him in the building. I heard you turned down our offer, he continued, his voice measured but curious. That's unusual. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. After you left, our engineering team reviewed your portfolio again. Specifically, your molecular separation technique for lithium extraction. They believe your recycling method could revolutionize our production line. The projected savings are substantial, far more than we initially calculated. I sat down at my kitchen table, processing this reversal. Miss Arvelo, are you there? Yes, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'm considering what it would take for me to join a company where qualified candidates are openly mocked for knowing their value. The silence that followed was satisfying. I understand your hesitation, he finally said. What would it take to bring you on board? Name your price. I'd thought about this moment, not specifically with Greenward, but in general. What would it take for me to feel valued, to feel secure, that my contributions wouldn't be exploited or diminished? I'd need 3 things, I said firmly. First, market rate compensation plus 15% to account for the initial disrespect. Second, I lead the materials division with full autonomy over research directions and project implementation. Third, and most importantly, I implement transparent salary bands across all departments with no gender or racial disparities. There was another pause. The first 2 are doable. The third is unconventional for our industry. So was laughing at a qualified candidate, I replied. Yet here we are. Let me be clear, Darren said. You're asking for salary transparency across the entire organization? Yes, with particular attention to addressing historical undervaluation of women and minorities in STEM fields. I've experienced it firsthand, and I won't be part of perpetuating it. He cleared his throat. I need to discuss this with the board. Can I call you back tomorrow? Of course, I said. I'll await your call. 10 minutes after hanging up, an email arrived from Nolan, the hiring manager who had laughed in my face. Ms. Arvelo, I understand you spoke with our CEO. Please reconsider our offer. The manufacturing project has already been scheduled around implementing your extraction method. We can't meet the deadline without your expertise. I apologize if our previous meeting ended on a negative note. I'd be happy to discuss terms that would make you comfortable joining our team. The contrast between his previous mockery and current desperation was striking. I closed my laptop without replying. That evening, my phone rang again. Darren Winslow. Ms. Arvelo, I've spoken with the board. We'd like to accept your terms, with one modification. We'll implement the transparent salary bands, but would like to do so gradually over 6 months to allow for proper review and adjustment of existing contracts. Would that be acceptable? My heart raced. I'd expected pushback, negotiation, perhaps a counteroffer, not immediate acceptance. That would be acceptable, I replied, trying to keep the surprise from my voice. I'd want to be directly involved in the review process. Of course. We'll have legal draft a contract tomorrow. When can you start? 2 weeks later, I walked into Greenwood Technologies as the new director of material sciences. My salary was double the original offer, with a signing bonus that covered 6 months of my rent. My new office had a view of the city skyline and a small adjoining lab for preliminary testing. On my first day, I requested the compensation data for my entire division. When HR hesitated, I reminded them of the agreement with the CEO. The spreadsheet arrived in my inbox by noon. The patterns were exactly what I'd suspected. Women in similar roles were making 22% less than their male counterparts. People with Hispanic surnames like mine averaged 18% lower compensation than others with identical qualifications. The longest-serving employees, particularly those who weren't aggressive negotiators, were the most underpaid relative to new hires. I spent my first week learning the operation, meeting my team, and reviewing the current projects. Everyone was polite, but I could sense their curiosity and perhaps skepticism. Who was this newcomer who'd negotiated directly with the CEO? What made her so special? On Friday afternoon, I called a division meeting. 57 employees crowded into the conference room, including Nolan, who now technically reported to me, a fact he seemed to be struggling to accept, based on his tight smile and rigid posture. Thank you all for welcoming me this week. I began. I've been impressed by the innovation happening here, but I've also identified areas where we can improve, not just in our technical processes, but in how we value our people. I clicked to my first slide, anonymized salary data showing the disparities. This is our current compensation structure, with names removed. As you can see, we have significant inconsistencies that don't correlate with experience, performance, or contribution. The room grew very quiet. People leaned forward, searching for where they might fall on the charts. Over the next 6 months, we'll be implementing transparent salary bands across the company. Every role will have a clear compensation range based on skills and experience, not on negotiation tactics or... I paused, making brief eye contact with Nolan. Personal bias. If you're enjoying this story so far, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. Click the bell icon so you don't miss the second part where you'll discover exactly how I transformed that toxic workplace, confronted the people who tried to undermine me, and ultimately created the most satisfying professional revenge of my career. Trust me, what happens next is something every person who's ever been undervalued needs to hear. After the meeting, several employees lingered, wanting to speak with me privately. A research analyst named Paloma approached first, her hands fidgeting with her tablet. "What you showed us, is that really happening here?" she asked quietly. "Yes, and we're going to fix it." "I've been here 3 years," she confessed. "Last month I discovered my new colleague, a man with half my experience, makes $15,000 more than me." When I mentioned it to Nolan, he said discussing salaries was unprofessional. By Monday morning, whispers were traveling through the building. Some employees were hopeful, others suspicious, and a few, particularly those benefiting from the current system, were visibly hostile. Nolan appeared at my office door at 9:30 a.m., not bothering to knock. "You've created quite the stir," he said, claiming the chair across from my desk without being invited. "The executive team is concerned about what you presented on Friday." "The data speaks for itself," I replied, continuing to review the project timeline on my screen. "Data can be misinterpreted," he countered. "Some employees have more negotiation leverage based on their unique skills. Others accept less because they value work, life balance, or other benefits. Presenting raw numbers without context creates unnecessary tension." I finally looked up. "Is that what happened when I negotiated with you? I lacked unique skills but valued work-life balance?" His expression tightened. "That was different." "It wasn't. It was exactly the same pattern shown in that data, but we're moving forward with transparency, regardless of how uncomfortable it makes those who've benefited from secrecy. He leaned forward. Look, Belinda. May I call you Belinda? Dr. Arvelo is fine. A flash of irritation crossed his face. Dr. Arvelo, then. You're new here. You don't understand our culture, our history. These kinds of dramatic changes could seriously impact morale. Whose morale, exactly? The underpaid employees who just discovered they've been systematically devalued? Or the overpaid executives who've benefited from that system? Nolan stood up. The CEO may have approved this initiative, but implementation requires cooperation from multiple departments. My team controls the project budget allocations. Just something to consider. The threat was clear. If I pushed forward with compensation equity, he would obstruct my projects. Thank you for making your position so transparent, I said calmly. I appreciate knowing exactly where we stand. After he left, I opened my email and drafted a message to Darren Winslow, detailing the conversation and requesting a meeting about project resource allocation. I had no intention of being intimidated after coming this far. The following weeks were challenging. While Darren publicly supported the compensation review, I discovered numerous roadblocks erected by mid-level management. Meeting invitations mysteriously disappeared from my calendar. Critical emails were buried in group threads. Equipment orders for my lab were delayed due to processing errors. But I wasn't without allies. Paloma became my most valuable team member, brilliant at both research and navigating company politics. She introduced me to others who had been marginalized. A chemical engineer named Henri, who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times despite his innovations. A lab technician named Daisy, whose protocol improvements had been implemented company-wide without recognition. Together, we worked late nights and weekends, refining my extraction method for Greenwood's specific manufacturing needs. We converted a disused storage area into an additional testing space when our equipment requests were delayed. We documented everything meticulously, every achievement, every obstacle, every accidental exclusion from critical meetings. 6 weeks into my tenure, I presented our first prototype results to the executive team. The data was irrefutable. My process increased rare earth recovery by 37%, while reducing chemical waste by 44%. The potential profit impact was in the millions. Darren was visibly impressed. Several board members asked detailed questions about implementation timelines. Only Nolan remained stone-faced, picking at perceived flaws in our testing methodology. These results are preliminary, he said dismissively, and implementation would require significant retooling of our production line, expenses not accounted for in the current budget. Actually, I countered, pulling up a detailed spreadsheet. We've calculated complete implementation costs, including retooling, additional personnel training, and a 15% contingency buffer. Even with these investments, the ROI would be realized within 9 months, with projected annual savings of $12 million thereafter. As the executives murmured appreciatively, Nolan's expression darkened. There's still the matter of production disruption during implementation, he argued. We can't afford downtime on our main line. Which is why, I continued, we've designed a phased implementation that utilizes the auxiliary line first, with only 2 48-hour windows of disruption to the main production schedule. I displayed the Gantt chart my team had prepared. The detailed plan is in your packets. By meeting's end, the board had approved expedited funding for my project. As we gathered our materials, Darren approached me. Impressive work, Dr. Arvelo. This is exactly why we brought you on board. Thank you. Though it's been challenging with certain administrative hurdles. His eyebrows raised. Hurdles? Nothing my team can't handle, I replied. But I'd like to discuss them with you privately sometime. Across the room, I noticed Nolan watching us, his knuckles white around his tablet. The next morning, I arrived to find my keycard access revoked from the main laboratory. The security desk had no explanation. I called Paloma, who let me in through a side entrance. It's getting worse, she whispered. The research server was mysteriously maintenance locked last night. We lost access to all our simulation data. Do we have backups? Yes, Henri has been mirroring everything to a secure cloud since your second week. But they don't know that. I nodded. Good. Let's continue as if we've been set back. I want to see how far they'll go. That afternoon, Nolan called an emergency department meeting, scheduling it for when I had a previously arranged video call with a key supplier. By the time I arrived, he was concluding his presentation, which is why we'll be placing Dr. Arvelo's project on a temporary hold while we reassess resource allocation, he was saying as I entered. The preliminary data, while promising, requires more verification before we commit to full implementation. That's interesting, I said loudly from the doorway. Every head turned, especially since the board approved expedited funding yesterday. Nolan's smile never wavered. Ah, Belinda, Dr. Arvelo. Glad you could join us. Yes, there was preliminary approval, but upon further review of departmental resources, I've determined we need to delay implementation until next quarter. Upon whose authority? As Chief Operations Officer, I have final approval on production scheduling. I hadn't known he held that title. It explained his level of obstruction. I see. And does the CEO know you're countermanding a board-approved initiative? A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Darren understands the complexities of production management. This isn't a cancellation, merely a postponement. Interesting. Because the reason I missed the first part of this meeting was my scheduled call with Adaptive Systems, the equipment supplier already contracted for our implementation next week. Murmurs rippled through the room. That contract hasn't been finalized, Nolan said sharply. It was signed this morning, by Darren himself. I held up my tablet showing the executed agreement. Delivery begins Monday. The blood drained from Nolan's face. Now, I continued, addressing the room, let's discuss the actual timeline we'll be working with. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined the implementation plan, assigning roles and establishing clear deliverables. Nolan remained silent, a forced smile fixed on his face, his eyes cold with fury. As the meeting concluded, he caught my arm at the door. You've made a serious miscalculation, he said quietly. This company operated successfully long before you arrived. No one is irreplaceable. I gently removed his hand. That's where you're wrong, Nolan. Some people genuinely are irreplaceable. The trick is knowing which ones. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The equipment arrived as scheduled. My team worked tirelessly, implementing the new process. When subtle sabotage occurred, incorrect parameter settings, missing catalysts, procedural errors, we anticipated and countered each one. Meanwhile, the compensation review progressed. Working with HR and finance, we identified 87 employees significantly underpaid compared to market rates and internal peers. The adjustment plan would cost the company approximately $3 million annually, a substantial sum, but one that paled in comparison to the savings my extraction process would generate. 3 months after my arrival, we activated the new system on the auxiliary production line. The results exceeded even our projections. 1% increased yield with 46% waste reduction. The board was elated. Darren began bringing potential investors and major clients to tour our facility, proudly showcasing our innovation. Nolan, however, became increasingly isolated. His attempts to undermine my project had been well documented in my regular updates to Darren. Several executives now bypassed him, coming directly to me with questions about materials and production improvements. Then came the company's quarterly town hall meeting. Traditionally, department heads presented their achievements and upcoming initiatives to the entire company. As the newest director, I was scheduled last. Nolan presented just before me, focusing on operational efficiencies his team had implemented, taking credit for several improvements actually developed by my group. I watched silently, cataloging each misrepresentation. When my turn came, I approached the podium calmly. Before I discuss the materials division's achievements, I'd like to clarify something from the previous presentation. I displayed side-by-side photographs of the production line modifications. These efficiency improvements were actually designed by Henri Nguyen from my team, who proposed them last month after identifying a bottleneck in the separation phase. I nodded toward Henri in the audience. His innovation deserves recognition. Nolan shifted uncomfortably in his seat as I continued through my presentation, highlighting each team member's contributions by name. When I reached our financial projections, I paused. As you can see, the new extraction process is exceeding expected returns. But there's another financial initiative I'd like to address. I displayed an anonymized graph showing salary adjustments across departments. Phase 1 of our compensation equity review is complete. Affected employees will see adjustments in their next paycheck. A buzz of excited whispers filled the auditorium. In the spirit of transparency, I want to explain how these adjustments were calculated. I detailed the methodology, the market comparisons, the internal equity considerations. This company's greatest asset is its people, all its people, not just those in leadership positions. Recognizing and fairly compensating everyone's contributions isn't just ethically right, it's good business. Valued employees innovate more, collaborate better, and stay longer. The applause that followed was thunderous. From the corner of my eye, I saw Nolan slip out a side door. The next morning, Darren called me to his office. Nolan was already there, along with the HR director. Dr. Arvelo, Darren began formally. Nolan has raised some serious concerns about your management approach. Nolan sat with his arms crossed, a satisfied expression on his face. He believes your compensation initiative is creating division among the staff and undermining the traditional authority structure. He's also suggested that you've been building what did you call it, Nolan? A parallel power structure, Nolan supplied, encouraging employees to bypass established management chains. I see, I said calmly. And what are your thoughts on these concerns, Darren? He leaned back. Well, that's why we're here. To discuss. Actually, I interrupted, pulling out my tablet. Before we continue, I'd like to share some relevant information. I connected my device to the room's display screen. Over the past 3 months, I've documented numerous instances of administrative obstruction directed at my team and our projects. I displayed a detailed spreadsheet with dates, incidents, and supporting evidence. Deleted meeting invitations, restricted lab access, delayed equipment orders, resource allocations mysteriously reduced, project timeline adjustments made without consultation. I scrolled through page after page. Each incident individually could be dismissed as an oversight. Together, they form a clear pattern. Nolan's face flushed. This is absurd. You're manipulating routine administrative issues to create some conspiracy. I'm not finished, I continued. I also have documentation of credit misappropriation, innovations and improvements developed by my team that were presented as achievements of the operations division. I switched to video clips from various meetings, showing Nolan taking credit for work he hadn't done. Most concerning, however, is this. I pulled up email exchanges Nolan had believed were private, communications instructing staff to delay or obstruct board-approved projects, direct violation of company policy and potentially fiduciary responsibility. The room fell silent. Darren's expression had transformed from concerned to stunned. How did you get those emails? Nolan demanded. Recipients who were uncomfortable with your instructions forwarded them to me. Quite a few people, actually. Darren finally found his voice. Nolan, is this accurate? It's taken completely out of context, he sputtered. This woman comes in here, disrupts established procedures, demands exceptional treatment. The extraction process she implemented will generate an estimated $14 million in additional profit this year. Darren interrupted. The compensation adjustments affect less than 10% of our operating budget while potentially reducing our historically high turnover rate. I'm not seeing the problem. The problem, Nolan said, his voice rising, is that she's undermining my authority. She went directly to you to get this job, bypassing proper channels. She demanded special treatment, special compensation. I demanded fair compensation, I corrected, for myself and for others. You know nothing about how this company operates. 8 years of specialized experience? Please, I've been in this industry for 15 years. And yet, I said quietly, you didn't recognize the potential of my extraction method until the CEO pointed it out to you. You laughed when I stated my worth. You've been trying to sabotage my work since I arrived. Why? Because I refuse to accept less than I deserve? Darren held up his hand. That's enough. Nolan, I need to speak with you privately. Dr. Arvelo, thank you for this information. We'll continue our discussion later. I gathered my materials and left, closing the door behind me but lingering in the adjacent hallway. Through the not quite soundproof walls, I heard Darren's voice rise. Completely unacceptable behavior. The board will. 2 hours later, a company-wide email announced a reorganization of leadership structure. Nolan would be transitioning to an advisory role effective immediately. The operations division would temporarily report directly to the CEO until a replacement could be found. The following week, Darren called me back to his office. I'd like to offer you a promotion, he said without preamble. Executive Vice President of Innovation and Operations. You'd oversee both your current division and the operations team. I raised my eyebrows. That's a significant expansion of responsibilities. With compensation adjusted accordingly, of course. He slid a paper across the desk. The figure made me blink. You've demonstrated exceptional technical expertise, he continued. But more importantly, you've shown leadership qualities we desperately need. You identify problems, develop solutions, and stand by your principles even when it's difficult. Those are rare traits. I studied him carefully. And the Compensation Transparency Initiative continues as planned. In fact, I'd like you to accelerate it. The board has reviewed the initial data and agrees we need to address these disparities company-wide. I nodded slowly. In that case, I accept. 6 months after walking out of that humiliating interview, I sat at the head of the conference table in the same room where Nolan had laughed at my counteroffer. The space had been renovated, brighter lighting, new technology, even the chairs were different, but the transformation of the company culture was even more dramatic. The compensation review was complete. Every employee now understood exactly how their salary was determined and what they needed to do to advance. Productivity had increased 23%. Turnover had dropped by half. My extraction process had been fully implemented across all production lines, generating savings that exceeded our most optimistic projections. 3 competitors had already approached us about licensing the technology. As the executive team filed in for our strategic planning session, I noticed a new face, a young woman clutching a portfolio, looking exactly as nervous as I had felt during my interviews. Everyone, this is Akira Tanaka, Darren introduced. She's joining us as our new environmental compliance specialist. I smiled at her. Welcome, Akira, we're glad to have you. After the meeting, she approached me hesitantly. Dr. Arvelo? I just wanted to say, your work on rare earth recycling has been revolutionary. It's why I wanted to join Greenward. Thank you, that means a lot. She glanced around to ensure no one was listening. I also heard about what you did with the compensation structure. My previous employer had similar issues. It's inspiring to see someone actually fix the problem instead of just acknowledging it. I thought about my journey, from being mocked in a job interview to transforming an entire company culture. Never let anyone tell you what you're worth, I told her, and never stay silent when you see others being undervalued. As she left, my phone buzzed with a news alert. My previous employer, the one where Meredith had taken credit for my work, was struggling after failing to keep pace with new extraction technologies. Their stock had dropped 30% in 3 months. I smiled and closed the notification. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to others, it's what you build for yourself and those around you. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. I'd love to hear in the comments about a time when you stood your ground and demanded your worth, or maybe when you wish you had. Has anyone ever underestimated you only to regret it later? Share your experiences below. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another story of triumph over those who try to diminish your value. Remember, knowing your worth isn't arrogance. It's self-respect. And sometimes, it's the first step toward changing not just your life, but an entire system.